Hello, welcome to Air Education, and in this video we are going to learn about the chapter 5 of our lesson in the fundamentals of accounting, which is about the types of business according to its activities. So actually, I know that some of you already have an idea on what type of activities a certain business has. Okay, so we actually discussed this in a partial way on our previous meetings, and maybe you are the consumer or the owners of this kind of businesses. So let's get started. So the first business or the first type of business is a service. All right? So a service business is actually a clinic, a school, a studio, dance studio, and other kind of services that particularly sells their own skills, their own expertise, or their own professional degree. So for the doctors, they have their own clinics and other things. So these are the people, or this is the kind of business that provides intangible products, meaning we cannot hold that because it is the skills. It is on the person's ability to provide a certain service in exchange for money. So that is the service industry. Again, when we say service, you are selling yourself in exchange for money because you have the skills and expertise to share with your clients. And make sure it is all in legal forms. Okay? So next one. So here are the important notes that we need to remember when it comes to service industry. What kind of business flow does this kind of business has? Okay? So this is the operating cycle of a service company. So it is very simple because from the cash on hand or the investment of the business, it pays directly the employees and other expenses. Upon payment of his or her employees and other expenses, they now perform services. And once they perform services, they receive payment from the customers. And the cycle repeats all around. However, there are some businesses who has this kind of cycle. So he first perform service, then he receives payment, then he receives cash on hand and pay the other expenses. Some are like that. Okay, again, a service industry has this very simple operating cycle. Next type of business is actually somehow complicated because it involves a lot of products and services. But before we discuss that, let's discuss first the advantages and disadvantages of a service industry. So the advantages, the good thing of a service industry, of course, since you are selling your skills and expertise, you don't need to have inventory. You don't have stocks, you don't have items to be sold because you are selling your own skills. And as well as you are a skilled expert, you are known for a particular skill. For example, a barber, he is very good in cutting male's hair. And another is a graphic artist. He is known to be good at designing any kind of pictures or graphics, okay? Or a director, an actor, a doctor doctor, and so on. Okay? So you have an expertise in a certain field. And also customization. Since you are the only one providing the product or the service, or in case that you have employees with you who are doing such service as well, so you can offer customization because you can do it right at uh, the very moment the client requested that. But it depends upon the kind of service that you are going to sell. Because, for example, if you wanted to go to a dentist and pull out your teeth, so there's no customization for that. But if you would like to have braces, the dentist can put some rubbers with different colors, or just as simple as plain as it is. Okay, so it depends upon the kind of service that you want. Next is next are rather the disadvantages of service industry. Some services are very hard to value. So for example, the construction workers or the laborers, they find it hard to value or price their services because most of their competitors price it at a very low level. So that's why even they are good enough in their specific field, they find it difficult to price higher. So the value that they are giving, since it is somehow the same with everybody else, so they just place prices accordingly in the competition. But there are others who is really good in placing their own value. Okay? Next, more likely to have less demand during economic crisis, especially the makeup artists, the hotel industry, the tourism industry. They are all service industry, right? So during economic crisis and health crisis that we are experiencing today, because we have experienced both of that. So there are only few demand for those kind of services because um, it can violate some protocols that we are now imposing, health and safety protocols. So they have a little demand in this time of pandemic. But apparently, um, there are some who is really good at their field who still have clients despite of the pandemic because they really practice the mandated rules and regulations by the government. Okay? Then, next one is merchandising. Again, this is somehow complicated because you have a lot of inventory. If in service you have no inventory, here you have because you are buying and selling products. Okay? So those products are, of course, tangible products because we can touch it and we can feel it right away. Okay? So again, this type of business is known as buy and sell business. I buy a bundle of clothes, I wash it, I sell it. Okay? So that is merchandising. We can touch the clothes, right? Okay? So there are actually two kinds of a merchandiser. The so-called wholesaler and the other one is a retailer. The wholesaler actually sells bulk products, for example, or a bundle of products. For example, the bundle of clothes. So they're selling all of those in bundle, per bundle. Okay, so they're the so-called wholesaler. The other one is retailer, just like in Sari store, we are buying discounted price or wholesale price from the wholesalers, then we sell it one by one in a retail store. So in Sari-Sari store, we are selling a pack of juice, a pack of Milo, and other junk foods. We are selling that per piece, okay? Per piece. So that is a retailer. And again, a wholesaler, they're selling it in bulk, okay? Now, let's move on to the cycle of the merchandising company. So since this kind of business already have its inventory, so the cycle is somehow um, flexible or somehow than longer than the service industry. Okay, so let's start with here. Okay, for example, we buy goods, or for example, we have a cash on hand already because we invested in this kind of business. So from the cash on hand, we buy the goods that we wanted to sell or that we want to sell. Next is we store these goods as our inventory. So if we have warehouse or stock room, so we store it there and it is considered already as our inventory. Then we sell this inventory. Once we sold the inventory, we already received payment from the customer. And again, the cycle goes on and on and on. Okay? So let me give you an example. So I have here a cash on hand. I buy a set of slippers. Since I bought 1,000 pair of slippers, I cannot sell it right away. So I will sell it one by one. So I store it first in our warehouse or stock room. And then I pulled out 50 pairs first. So those 50 pairs, I sold it for $10 each, and each customer paid it for that specific price. Then now I receive my payment. There is already a cash on hand. Again, there is again a cash on hand. Okay? So this is the cycle of the merchandising inventory. Since we now have goods, we need to have a storage for that. All right? So this is the merchandising business. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of industry? First, more opportunities to attract customers. Why? Because most customers wanted to see things based on outlook, based on how they will portray themselves. Maybe they wanted to have clothes just like what their idols have, like Korean pop singers and so on. Okay, so there are a lot of opportunities to attract customers if you are engaged with the buy and sell industry. And it is flexible to changes. So in case that you don't have anything to sell, so you can change it based on the preferences of your customers. But there's a but. This can only be applicable to dry goods. When we say dry goods, these are non-perishable products. Because if you're selling a perishable products, although it is considered as a buy and sell business or a merchandising business, you have a stock, but still it is perishable by nature. You can't be flexible to changes. Because if you experience rotten oranges or any other fruits that you have, or a damaged pizza, bread, and so on, so you can no longer sell that specific merchandise. Okay, the disadvantages of merchandising industry: profits are usually high, dependent on prices set by suppliers. So in case that you're buying or selling something, if the suppliers set a low price for the particular merchandise, you can sell it in retail for a higher price. Depends on how you branded your product. So branding is very important in establishing the business. Okay, next one, need for inventory control. So this is one of the most crucial part of merchandising business because you need to have inventory control. How many are sold, how many are still left, or how many are stagnant, and all. Okay, so you need to have a record for that. And this is the disadvantage. Some merchandise may be perishable because, again, you can't be flexible to changes if you're selling perishable goods. Might require employees with different functions because you need to have an accountant, a financer, purchaser, marketer, producer, and so on. So there are different roles created if you are selling a merchandise industry because there are a lot of people who will manage every role in the industry. Next, might need to spend on some occasional improvements within the store because if you are selling a good and or a tangible product, you need of course to improve your physical store, right? Because that's what the businesses are doing before pandemic. But since we are now in the pandemic, we now have the so-called e-commerce store where you can see people buying and selling online. So some businesses, they are making their own website attractive. So that is the improvement that we are doing right now. We are no longer focused on how our physical store looks like as long as we have a good e-commerce store that can compete with anybody else. Okay? Next one. So this kind of business is kind of has a lot of process. So let's put it that way. Has a lot of process because it has different kind of procedures to follow. So that's why it is called complicated organizations. Because we are not just buying and selling products, we are buying product to create a new product. Okay? Instead of just selling that right away, you are creating a new product out of that specific material that you bought from your suppliers. So those are the so-called raw materials that we can convert into products, okay? Like paper mills, steel mills, car manufacturers, drug manufacturers, okay? So this is the operating cycle of a merchandise. Oh, manufacturing rather. I just forgot to remove this, okay? This is a manufacturing industry. So from the cash on hands, we pay for the input of our raw materials. For example, we are going to make a lemon juice for sale. Before we sell a lemon juice, we need to buy first a lemon, water, sugar, and ice, perhaps ice, okay? So once we pay for that inputs, we are now going to convert those inputs into finished goods. So we are now cut the lemon, put some sugar, put some water, put some ice. So that is now our lemon juice. So we can now store the finished goods as our inventory. And once we're done doing that, we can now sell it to our end users and receive payment from them. Okay? So this is complicated because you need to create your own finished product. Right? Now, what are the advantages of a manufacturing industry? There is likely a continuous demand for manufactured goods. Some, okay, not all, but some. especially foods. If you're going to a restaurant, so that is considered as a manufacturing store because there are out of the raw materials that they have for their pasta, they need noodles, basil, olive oil, pepper, and so on. Okay, so they need all of those materials before they can convert that into a pasta. Okay, so for food industry, yes, I could agree that there is continuous demand for that. But if you are going to sell um, other products that cannot be consumed immediately, like soap, makeups. So those are manufactured goods, right? But if there are a lot of market, if you can find a right market for you, so you can actually sell uh, this kind of products immediately. Okay. Next one, the creation of manufactured product often leads to a higher job satisfaction. Okay, most of the companies has a greater percentage of satisfaction if they are manufacturing products, especially in Western countries and in other Asian countries who have factories and all. Okay, the disadvantages rather of this kind of industry, because of the scope of activities, manufacturing firms are often more labor and capital intensive. Dapat mas maraming tao, dapat mas malaking capital yung ating i-invest. More labor and more capital. Okay? The cost of the manufactured products usually depends on the price and availability of raw materials. If we are now selling a mango shake and it is not the season yet of producing mangoes, so the price of mangoes in the lean season is higher compared to the price of mangoes during its peak season. So you will depend the price of your products again on the availability of your consumers or of your suppliers rather, the suppliers of your raw materials. Okay? Especially right now, there's a huge challenge for this because most of the restaurants, the materials to create a certain recipe are now into um, are now at the peak of its price. That's why it's very hard for them to adjust prices because perhaps if they increase prices, the consumer will no longer go to them. That's why most of these restaurants are now adjusting the way or the measurement of each product just to minimize cost. Okay? So that is uh, the different types of business according to its activity. So now let's review. We have service, merchandising, and manufacturing type of business industry. Now let's move on to our classwork for this session. So since we discussed that a merchandising industry has its inventory, even the manufacturing side, but mostly on both of them, actually. Okay? So we need to do just in time. Okay? So let's have a research on how just in time philosophy is applied by manufacturing companies as well as its advantages and disadvantages. So please also cite examples of different manufacturers around the Philippines only. Again, only in the Philippines who practice just-in-time philosophy. So you can encode the answers in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Again, this is in a paragraph form. Think about someone who tells a story, so just like that, with a limit of 300 words. So this is not updated again. So just submit your classwork based on the deadline stipulated on our Facebook group or our Google Classroom. Okay? Again, you need to research how this philosophy is being used by manufacturing companies as well as its advantages and disadvantages, and don't forget to cite examples of manufacturers practicing JIT. At least 5 manufacturing firms who practice this kind of industry. Again, this is only in the Philippines. Okay? This should only in the Philippines. So that's it. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something from me today. Happy learning, students, and have a great day.